Hi everybody, Ian Bremmer here, getting a lot of questions about Venezuela. It's been a few weeks now since the United States had that extraordinary military operation and was able to capture Nicolás Maduro, the former president, illegal president, not democratically elected, stole power, and not anymore. He is now out of the country in New York City, arrested and facing justice. It has the follow-on so far has been, I got to say, pretty successful. I mean, successful not only because no Americans were killed during the military operation, but also because so far, at least, the knock-on impact in Venezuela and in the region has been pretty positive. What we've seen is that most of the countries across South America have populations that have been very supportive in these actions because Maduro was seen as driving lots of instability. Some 8 million Venezuelan migrants not coming to the U.S., most of them in countries like Colombia and Brazil and Chile because of Maduro. They saw him exporting instability, exporting a lot of drugs. Those countries, their populations in the U.S., it's a lot about affordability and about immigration. In South America, it's a lot about security and safety on the ground. And that's why people like Bukele in El Salvador are polling at 92% right now. That's why U.S. action to take Maduro out seen so positively. Now, if it was regime change, if it had been the Americans with boots on the ground and trying to bring about a transition of that regime, you'd see a lot more criticism of the United States, a lot more expense, a lot more vulnerability, a lot more ways it could go wrong. But that's not what's happening. Instead, you've got the American military still stationed there off the coast of Venezuela, a very clear muscle flexing or else, but telling the Venezuelan government, which is mostly the same as the old government, you better behave in a way that is aligned with the United States. And so far, that is what we're seeing. We're seeing more openness on the oil side. We see change in the investment climate to be closer to what Chevron's deal is in terms of having operating control of their investments with PDVSA, the Venezuelan state oil company. That's going to lead to more investment. We see the same thing happening in the mining sector, which is going to lead to investment. The fact that Venezuela was so poorly managed, the economy was so abysmally managed, so corruptly managed by Maduro and his cohort is certainly helpful on that front. It makes it more likely that the United States will find a way to open direct diplomacy and some recognition with this government and eventually even lead to the IMF providing not only financial support but also economic advice at a much better level than they ever would have gotten or executed on under the Maduro regime. Now, none of that is to say that we're going to see a near-term transition to a democracy. There has been a number of the political prisoners who were illegally detained, and they were senior members of the opposition, now released. That's a positive, though the Nobel winner, Maria Machado, is still living outside of Venezuela. Very hard to imagine she's going to be running that country anytime soon, given that and lack of full-throated support from Trump in her becoming president. It's interesting that Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, who of course has been most focused on this issue and implementation, has been talking about Venezuela as a model a la Spain or Paraguay, which is a matter of years to see a transition to a democracy as opposed to months or 1 year or a bit longer. In other words, that is not the most urgent. Rather, what they'd rather see is for the economy to turn around, the worst human rights abuses being limited, but recognizing it's still functionally an authoritarian regime, just one that the Americans have an easier time working with. And that does reflect reality on the ground. It does reflect the actual U.S. policies with other countries around the world. The U.S. has a pretty functional relationship with a lot of Gulf monarchies that aren't in any way democratic, has a pretty functional relationship with Pakistan today, which isn't particularly democratic, really run by the military. Very different from Biden talking about whether there's democracies and autocracies, and the U.S. is on the side of one. That has been a little bit more true than not, but certainly not wildly and certainly not today. And also, in combination with Trump saying, I don't want to get involved in any big long-term wars and don't want American troops on the ground in these countries, it's consistent with what he has been saying for his first presidency and now for his second. Will that continue to be the case if we see military action, which looks increasingly likely with the Islamic Republic, potentially a real regime overthrow and a decapitation strike against the supreme leader Khamenei? That's more challenging. That's a much bigger downside, especially given what would happen in Iran after, what would happen in the region after. But in terms of Venezuela so far, relatively limited aims and so far accomplishments that are more significantly positive for the people of Venezuela than anything you would have seen in the first year of the Trump administration or the 4 years of the Biden administration. It's worth being called out as such. That's it for me. I'll talk to y'all real soon.